Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to our event this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. Just waiting for a few more people to log on and join us. Hi, everyone. Delighted to have you all here.
Hey, Ruth.
Hi to all our panelists and guests. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Just to be aware that we're recording this session today, everyone. So if you could all mute yourselves and turn your videos off, that would be most helpful. If you're not comfortable being part of the session that's been recorded, then you can decide whether to stay with us or leave us this afternoon. My name is Ruth O'Connor. I'm a fashion journalist who's been writing about sustainable fashion and Irish design for almost 15 years. And I'm really happy to be here this afternoon to MC this event. The event is being run as part of the first ever Dublin Climate Action Week. And it's a number of events that are running up until this coming Sunday. So make sure you check out any of the other events that are taking place. Today's event is a joint event by Fingal County Council and South Dublin County Council and the Dublin Climate Action Regional Office. So the purpose of Dublin Climate Action Week is to engage citizens on issues of climate change and climate action. And the tagline for this week's events is taking action together. So with that in mind, you know, sometimes the whole idea of climate action and climate change can seem very overwhelming. They're huge topics and there's no one overriding solution to these issues. So for today, we're going to be joined by 3 women who have not only taken steps in their everyday lives to try and mitigate climate change, but who have literally made being more sustainable their business. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Carrie Mourin. Carrie Mourin is the Director of Fashion Revolution Ireland and is a consultant on circular fashion. Where do we start with Carrie Ann's CV? We could be here a while. I hope you've got time and your copies in hand. Carrie Ann is an award-winning Irish social entrepreneur. Over the last 15 years, she's gained recognition as one of the leading voices on sustainable and circular fashion in Ireland and has a raft of degrees at undergraduate and postgraduate level, including a degree in law, a diploma in fashion, and a master's in environmental sustainability. In her former role with the NCBI charity, she was responsible for end-of-life and cradle-to-cradle strategies for some 1,850 tons of donated clothing across 117 stores nationwide, and for the internal sustainability practices within the organisation. Carrie Ann is country coordinator for Fashion Revolution Ireland's annual campaign and was recently appointed to the National Advisory Committee for the Irish Government's implementation of the Waste Action Plan for a Circular Economy. She has vast experience in the areas of lecturing, fashion design, environmental management, sustainability and labour rights. Hi, Carrie Ann. How do you follow up that introduction?
I didn't think you'd do all of that, but thank you very much for the very thorough introduction.
We now have Aisling, who I'd love to introduce you to as founder and CEO of New, the app for swapping pre-loved fashion. As the founder of fashion swapping app New, Aisling is a champion for the circular economy and she's a firm believer that technology could be used for good. Aisling founded New in order to create an accessible and sustainable alternative to fast fashion for lovers of style and all things fashion related. New works by creating a platform that allows people to swap and share clothing, thus negating some of the impact of fast fashion in the environment. Named as one of Ireland's 30 under 30, Aisling has grown the New community across the UK and Ireland and is currently engaged in a funding round to grow the team and to grow the business. Hi, Aisling. And finally, we're joined by Taz Callagher, who is one of the co-founders of the Useless Project. If you're feeling useless in the face of climate change, don't worry, the Useless Project are here to help. It's an awareness raising and event collective that aims to show people there's no need to feel useless in the face of global climate crisis. The Useless Project has over 43,000 followers on Instagram, a growing community that's interested in finding out practical but essentially fun ways to live a more sustainable life. Together with her co-founder Ger, Taz hosts webinars, workshops and flea markets both on and offline, and engages with schools and businesses at home and abroad to show that positive change can happen if we work together and essentially use less. Today we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions, and I can see lots of familiar names here, which is fantastic. Many of you working already in the sustainable fashion space, but today's talk is also for people maybe who are just starting out on their sustainable journey, and our panelists are really happy to answer any of your questions, queries, or to share your thoughts with our other guests. So please feel free to post any comments in the chat section. So, panelists, each of you inspires others to be more sustainable through your work, but I'm wondering, are there defining moments or one particular person that perhaps set you on your journey of sustainability? Aisling?
Yeah, I had a very specific moment, I think, that things really changed for me. So for me, it was in 2013, I spent time in India with SUIS Educational Development, which is an Irish NGO. And this was at the backdrop of the Rana Plaza disaster. So in the April before I had gone to India, a 7-story garment factory in Dhaka in Bangladesh had collapsed. And this was really devastating, absolutely devastating. People died. It shone a spotlight on, sorry, my phone is ringing. It really shone a spotlight on what fashion had become, and that kind of the glamorous facade was, not glamorous considering all of the things that happened to people on the planet behind the production of clothing. And I would definitely have described myself as a fast fashion gal, just going to the high street every week to find something new to wear with money I didn't have for an event that I, was just gonna go to the next week again. And it was just very much looking at fashion as disposable. And I really never thought of it as anything other than, the shop floor. What happens when I didn't know what would happen before that, and really what would happen after it left my wardrobe. And before I went over to India, I was really excited about this market that they have in Delhi, where all of the clothes that were, due to go to high street brands didn't make it over because they had really small defects, or, kind of a button missing, or just something that was incredibly small, and they were sold at this unbelievably knocked down price, when I'm sure the brands are still making their margin on that as well. And before I went over, I was kind of starting to consider, what did this mean? And then having experience actually meeting people who were involved in the fashion industry and seeing the pollution firsthand and seeing what was happening on the ground, I eventually did pass that market in Delhi before I was heading home, and everything had just changed for me. I felt so sick looking at these piles of clothes that were just wasted, and kind of all the destruction that had really gone into making these clothes. And I guess what changed for me when I got back was I'd found out all of this, and I was going back into college, and I felt so frustrated at being complicit in this industry that I really didn't want to be a part of. But I was so inherently tied to, everyone has to wear clothes. These clothes were affordable, buying from fast fashion and high street brands. And I kind of felt that sustainability at that point especially was really considered a luxury, and I think still is across a lot of different products and a lot of different industries. And for me, I felt that, I have a wardrobe full of clothes and I consume so much fashion. And so if I were to change my habits, I could have a really significant impact, but those opportunities are not necessarily there for me right now. And there's a lot of locational privilege that kind of ties into that, like who can access pre-loved fashion in these, super, I guess, like thrift stores that have like a load of amazing items, and they're not really accessible to kind of everyone. But that's really how it felt for me. And so over the course of, I'd say, the next 2 years, like it really did take me a long time to start changing my habits. But the way I look at fashion just completely changed, and the way I became emotionally attached to clothes completely changed. And I guess I just have one of those personalities that like, you know, I get so mad that I end up starting a business. And I think that's kind of just what happened to me. Like I just found out too much and I really couldn't go back after that had happened. But it was that experience that just totally changed my understanding of what fashion is and what it should be, really.
Brilliant. And we're going to find out a bit more about that business that you established as a result of that experience. And Carrie, is there anybody or any moment in particular, do you think, that inspired your sustainable journey?
Yeah, I suppose I've always been, I would believe, a bit of an environmentalist growing up. I was studying to become a solicitor, training in specialising in human rights and environmental legislation and policy. And I jumped ship, and just as I started my apprenticeship, to become a fashion designer. Thought I was going into a really nice, glamorous life, change of career. Little did I know. So yeah, it was actually when I was studying, I think it was in second year, that my kind of light bulb moment of what's going on here was actually in our studio, and the amount of textile going to waste from all of our offcuts when we were creating our clothing. Now, this is about 16 years ago, and after studying textiles, I was like, you know, these are beautiful pieces being thrown away. And that was literally my trigger point then to kind of snowball in. So what I found then when I went to graduate college, I suppose we weren't a sustainable designer. That term wasn't really kind of coined around then. It was more eco fashion. And I worked with a lot of kind of dead stock, stuff like curtains stuff that I would find in charity stores. And that was really, and then I think it was in my final year, and the Rediscovery Centre were looking for a program manager to set up their fashion initiative. Again, we're talking, I think 14, 15 years ago. And we had early conversations, and yeah, that really, then we just, you know, the relationship with the Rediscovery Centre ignited, and, you know, stayed there for 10 years working within the area.
Okay, thanks, Emil. And Taz, I know the use of project is perhaps a slightly newer venture. So can you tell us about why you have got into this area of sustainability? And I know that your interest goes wider than fashion.
Yeah, so I think as well, like in terms of like a catalyst point, funnily enough, mine would have been the Rana Plaza collapse that happened in 2013 as well. And I think why that really stands out to me is that's when I was knee deep in fast fashion myself as well. I was a student at the time when you could buy an outfit for €10 for a Friday night out. And I remember I was online, and it was Facebook at the time, there was no Instagram, and I was scrolling through. I had like a couple of tabs open, and one of the tabs was a fast fashion site that I was buying an outfit, and another tab was Facebook, and I was scrolling through, and a video came up of this Rana Plaza collapse that happened in Bangladesh. 1,113 people, I think it is, perished. And I think it was the first time where I watched that video and I was like, I am the reason for this. Like, I one tab over, I have a basket full of clothing that is causing this destruction. And I was like, there are people dying so that I can purchase this t-shirt for a fiver that says, it's the weekend, baby. You know, it was just kind of like this really stark moment where I was like, I can't put my blinders onto this anymore, because I think we had heard about like sweatshops. The term sweatshops has been around for ages, but again, like with our blinkers on and just like, we're not involved. And that was a real kind of eye-opening moment where I realized that like, I am the reason for this, you know, I am complicit in this.
Yeah. So for today's talk, Carrie, I think we're going to go to you first, because I know that you've got loads of statistics on how our fashion choices impact climate change and the scale of the problem. Then we're going to move to Aisling to talk about how her business New helps mitigate some of these issues. And then finally, Taz is going to share with us some of her brilliant tips and tricks to make you know, a more sustainable approach to our wardrobes more accessible. So, Carrie, we hear a lot about sustainability, and they're really buzzwords at the moment around sustainability and fashion, but how does producing a fashion garment actually contribute to climate change?
Yeah, great question. Actually, I'm going to share my screen because I put a visual together that I think really will help people resonate exactly what you're saying there. So just bear with me a moment. So yeah, so is it working now? Here we go. So to really kind of I suppose, understand how our wardrobe actually impacts climate change, looking at a life cycle of a fashion garment really helps resonate exactly what it goes through and what is happening across that. So when we look at this image here, we're talking about life cycle of a cotton t-shirt. At the beginning, we're looking at the cultivation of cotton. Now, at this stage alone, we're looking at genetically modified seeds have really come into the sector over the last 15, 20 years. They're not regenerative, so therefore each year they have to be sown new seeds on that. We're looking at the harvesting of cotton, we're bringing in now water, we're bringing in pesticides. When we move to the actual creation and the spinning and all that, this is where we're going to get really heavily intensive energy and water again, we're still bringing in more chemicals along here. When we move to the manufacturing of this garment, again, we're looking at bringing in a lot more kind of societal issues on this, but very heavy energy is used across this. And then looking at the dyeing, the washing, the rinsing, again, we're looking at detergents, dyes, chemicals. On average, the industry is using about 3,500 chemicals and substances, which then kind of leak into our waterways, our systems, killing biodiversity. Moving into transportation then of our products, if we are looking at getting our products made over in India and China, we have to transport them across. So again, we're creating more greenhouse gases through transportation. Marketing and packaging. And what I really want to bring up here is the marketing, packaging, and retail is there is a digital footprint here as well, and that a lot of people don't really kind of resonate with e-commerce and how we market our products. So there is a digital pollution across here as well. And then how we consume our products. So with fast fashion, we're consuming 100 to 120 million garments a year. And really, when it comes to the end of life, to reduce, reuse, recycle, unfortunately, those approximately 120 garments being produced every year, we're looking at about 70% of those garments going to landfill.
Yeah.
And the issue we have,
I mean, sorry, Carrie, on to interrupt you. I mean, the whole idea of waste is a major issue as well. So it's not just about the production of the garment.
No. It's really when it comes to the end of life, which unfortunately with fast fashion is very, very quick. Most of our garments are being sent to landfill. And the problem with it, like end of life waste, whether it goes off to incineration or whether it goes to landfill, if it goes into landfill, depending on the landfill environment, methane and other greenhouse gas emissions are produced within that as well. So throughout the whole life of a garment, we are looking at water, energy, and CO2.
Okay.
Which from a global...
Sorry, go ahead.
Which from a global perspective, we're looking at 1.2 billion CO2, which sits somewhere in with the greenhouse gases. Fashion industry sits somewhere in around 8 to 10% of all greenhouse gases from the industry.
Wow, okay, so it's like a major scale problem.
Absolutely.
I feel that sometimes people think that these problems are so huge that for the ordinary consumer, it's quite difficult for them to conceive of kind of helping create any change. Who do you believe should be responsible for the change? Should it be businesses or individuals?
Yeah, no, and I think I find it's very frustrating. I see a lot of people sitting in on this conversation today feel that frustration as well, is that we as individuals and consumers can certainly do our part, but unless there's systemic change across industries, it's not really going to change. This is where we need accountability, responsibility, transparency in the fashion industry, regulation and policy as well to really hold them accountable to it.
And is the fashion industry being held accountable enough at the moment, do you think, or whose responsibility should it be to do that?
No, look, you know, the Bangladesh Accord came into action after the Rana Plaza disaster, and we're now looking at that hopefully going international. That is more so for the health and safety of our garments. We have the United Nations Fashion Charter for Climate Change coming in, and brands are signing up to that as well. But the reality is that, you know, brands are bringing out really great sustainability strategies and roadmaps, but they really need to start aligning with science-based targets to show their carbon footprint. And the issue that a lot of companies in fashion have is they don't really know where to start with assessing their environmental footprint. So until you can assess your environmental footprint, you can't really benchmark, you know, a really good kind of improvements to align with that.
And I know I've spoken to you in the past about some brands, particularly in the denim space, that are doing very well in terms of sustainability. Are there any brands that you see as kind of, you know, beacons of hope in terms of the capability to actually run a business sustainably on a large scale?
Yeah, look, you know, there's brands out there, you know, and have come into news again recently with massive strategies and roadmaps and all that. The problem we see with that, and I don't mean to be cynical about this, is if you're working on mass production and still mass consumption, you're not sustainable. So we really look towards aligning with kind of smaller brands, especially in the last couple of years, that can really, you know, map out their life cycle and their value chain and their supply chain, and really understand what's happening at each point of that. So I would certainly always recommend for anyone who's navigating that and kind of a little bit, the Good On You app is a really fantastic resource that you can put the brand in, and they will give you recommendations about where they sit on their environmental impacts and societal impacts. So I recommend people to look that up.
Okay. That sounds brilliant. Thanks for that tip. And Aisling, in terms of this idea that there's so much fashion being produced and there's so many items of clothing being produced, I know that New is a platform that you've developed to allow people to swap and share clothing so that, you know, clothes that have already been produced can have a longer life. And I love your idea that, you know, secondhand doesn't have to mean second best. Can you tell people how New actually works for people who aren't familiar with the platform?
Yeah, absolutely. I have just two very quick images that show you. I might try share these. Can you guys see that? Great. This is just a very basic overview of how New works. And really, as you were saying, Ruth, the concept is just you have a wardrobe full of clothes, many of which you're not wearing, many of which you've fallen out of love with. They are perfectly fine pieces of clothing, and we need to start giving them the full extent of their life cycle. We can't always do that individually. If you can wear a piece 30 times, 100 times, that's amazing. But often the way fashion changes so quickly, and the kind of fashion that you have that's very specific for different events or different kinds of seasons or times in your life, ends up meaning that you actually have a lot of waste in your wardrobe, or what will become waste if you don't pass those on to someone who it's going to be a new item for them, even though it's not brand new off the shop floor, but they're still getting all the kind of enjoyment out of it. So very simply, you join the New app, which you can download on iOS or Android, and you just type in NUW, and you upload the pieces of clothing that are in your wardrobe that you love but you no longer want to keep. That goes through our approval process, just so we can make sure that everything that goes on the platform is something that we really believe will get a second life. And if it's not, we then recommend that goes to a recycling centre instead. For each item that you put up on the platform, you'll be given a token once it's approved. So it's silver for high street items and gold for mid-market or designer items. So it's really simple. It takes all the kind of monetization of individual pieces of clothing out of the equation. And that's, I guess, why New is really different. We don't focus on the monetary value of pieces, because generally people swap high street fashion, and those are the kinds of pieces that can be very difficult to resell because the industry kind of devalues those items even at the very first sale. So for each piece you've uploaded, you've got your token, and then you can use that token like you would any other currency on the platform. So you can use your token to be able to request an item that you really like from another member. There's a 99-cent fee for every swap that you do, and once it's accepted, you're able to arrange the delivery with that member. So you just pay the cost of postage for whatever that piece is, and members often get a couple of pieces at a time from the same person, and a lot of friendships spark up because of it. But it's really just about kind of enjoying and repeating that process, and gamifying the experience as well, because I guess we fundamentally believe that if the solutions to kind of the climate crisis are not accessible to all and also fun, and kind of give people the same lift that they would get, you know, shopping fast fashion, we are very unlikely to get the change that we need as quick as we need it. So that's just a bit about how exactly the platform works. And this is just a very quick overview of what it looks like. Really, I guess, familiar interface. So you just browse, you have your profile, you find pieces that you like, you can favorite them, and then you can chat to other members on the platform.
Brilliant. And I mean, I suppose there's two things that interested me there about what you were saying. You know, that idea of getting that sort of hit that we get, you know, of pleasure, that dopamine rush we get when we buy something new. You're saying that your members get that same kind of hit because the item is new to them, even though it's not a brand new item, essentially.
Yeah.
And I love, you know, I was very interested the other day when we were speaking prior to the event that you were saying that unlike maybe perhaps a resale platform where people are basing their judgments on perhaps, you know, the resale value of the item, you find that your users are choosing clothing merely because they like it, not because of what it's worth financially.
Yeah, that was really interesting for us. One of the big learnings, I guess, as a founder was when we first came up with the concept, it was very much based on our real life experience. And when you are taking your friend's clothes, whether they want you to or not, you go into your friend's room or you're chatting to them or you're looking at their social media and you're picking the pieces that you just love the look of. You're not necessarily asking what the brand is and you're not asking your friend what the price is.
Yeah.
And that was a real core understanding that we had to get to in order to design how this platform would work. The difficulty with resale is that it's become very professionalized. So the people who can tend to do really well on resale platforms are those who actually run it like a store. They bulk buy, they then sell. They have a lot of clout. They can put a lot of energy into building their status on these platforms. But for people who just have a couple of bits in their closet and like their, I guess, job to be done or their end goal is to just get more clothes into their wardrobe and pass on the things that they just don't want anymore, it can become very difficult to kind of build that kind of clout on other platforms. And then there's also the question of the value. So fast fashion pieces, even though they are valuable pieces because they have been made, they have been undervalued because it's an exploitative industry, but they are valuable because they are made from resources and you can wear them, you can get use out of them. But the industry at the very first point of sale devalues them completely, which means that they're super hard to resell, even though they're perfectly good pieces of clothing. So the ThredUp is a massive resale platform in the States. They do amazing reports every year. And they found that it's high street brands, the likes of Zara, the likes of H&M, that are the most difficult and less frequently resold. And that's really because people are putting up pieces and they're assigning them a value that nobody else believes it's worth that, and they don't want to give it away until they get that value. And that is inefficient for actually recirculating pieces of clothing. We are stopping pieces that are perfectly good from being worn, they're staying too long, and then they're being disposed of. So we want to kind of stop.
Sorry to interrupt, but conversely, you found that brands that maybe won't sell in a charity shop, for example, will swap on your platform. Isn't that right? Because they're familiar brands, people know the sizing, they like, you know, the kind of fashion element of the garment and so on.
Yeah, they've been the lowest performing on resale, have been the highest performing on new. And Zara is a kind of example for us.
Very interesting, yeah. And I know that you're always trying to encourage your users. You've attempted to make every aspect of your business as transparent as possible and as climate friendly as possible. When it comes to people posting out, you know, garments that they're swapping with people, how do you kind of do you encourage people to maybe use environmentally friendly packaging? Do you partner with different providers to ensure postage is carbon neutral or whatever?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work on that because it's kind of one step removed because it goes peer to peer. So a couple of things that we worked on, letting people know that On Post within Dublin is zero impact. So they've done a lot of work on their sustainability. Parcel Motel is another option for our members. It's 33% less impactful than standard post because you lose that last mile delivery. You drop it to a locker and you pick it up from a locker, and that tends to be part of people's commute as well. So those are always just trying to reduce the amount that that piece is picking up in a carbon impact as it's being passed around. Also, new doesn't have returns. So if you get an item and it doesn't fit, or it's not really your style or what you kind of thought it would look like on you, you simply just re-upload it and you're reassigned your token. So that can pass on from you to someone else rather than that factor of returns. So really it's about just being transparent with members as well, that it's better to go pre-loved, but you don't want to be sending something to the States and have a massive carbon impact on top of that as well. So,
yeah, because I mean, so do people tend to stay local within the UK and Ireland with the new service?
Yeah, right now we have our mainland Britain, and we have Ireland and Northern Ireland as two separate platforms. So we will look at merging them, but we wanted to look first at the environmental impact of that, because there's so much frequent trade. Actually, the impact isn't really that high, but looking at other areas as we expand out and scale, it would be more regionally focused. So you would most likely have a radius of where you could actually share within.
Okay, and I know that, sorry, one second. I have something else I want to ask you. In terms of your learnings or research about how keeping existing clothing in circulation actually helps in terms of waste and impact on the environment, what have you found?
Yeah, so RAP did a report in 2013, which is old in terms of data sets, but they reviewed resale platforms, swapping platforms, and specifically for swapping platforms, for every piece of clothing you swap, you'll offset 25% of the resources that would have been used in the production of a new item of clothing. So for every 4 items that you swap, you are stopping one piece of clothing from being made, and as a consequence, stopping one piece from eventually going to landfill. We did some work with the London Waste and Recycling Board as well more recently, and they can't say for sure, but they said it's likely that that has increased to about 60% just because fast fashion is exponentially growing and the use that people get out of their clothes is reducing and reducing every year. So being able to recirculate the pieces that already exist is by far the most sustainable thing to do. Hands down, no question. And I think something that we find that's really important as well is if we have brands working on more sustainable means of production, but we do not change the consumption from the person who buys that piece of clothing, we do not achieve what we need to do. We're still fueling demand for more pieces of clothing to be made. So it's really important to just get that use out of that and always choose something that already exists rather than brand new.
Okay. And Taz, I suppose I can bring you in there, perhaps, because the Useless Project was established to raise awareness about better practices in terms of fashion and, I suppose, wider consumption. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you do? Because I was very interested to hear recently that you're working with schools, you're working with businesses and so on, to increase people's awareness of sustainability and climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. I prepared like a tiny slideshow that's probably the most unnecessary slideshow in the world, but I put it together, guys, so you're getting it.
Brilliant. Bring it on.
Sorry, bear with me for 1 second now. Let me find out where it is. This always happens, doesn't it? Oh yeah, here we go. Let me share my screen. Sorry. Now. Okay, so yeah, this is just a bit of a tiny little bit of an overview on the Useless Project and how we got started with the Useless Project. So Geraldine and I started the Useless Project in 2018, and it was basically, it was a bit of a serendipitous moment because I was a podcast producer and Geraldine was a journalist, used to write about podcasts, so she knew me, she followed me because she used to review the podcasts that I produced. I didn't know who she was, and I started doing this thing online called like charity shops sneak peeks on a Monday, where basically on a Monday I'd go to a different area of Dublin and like show what could be found in the charity shops in that area. That got a tiny bit of traction, and I decided that I wanted to try to get, there was kind of like maybe like 10 to 20 people getting back to me every week saying, oh my goodness, I can't wait to see what's in the charity shops this week. So I thought it'd be lovely to try to get all of this, get these people together and organize like a tiny little mini swap shop. My intention was to get 10 people into a pub, sit around a table, everybody throw 10 items of clothing in the middle of the table, and everybody leaves with 10 items of clothing, like for it not to be, you know, a very casual affair. But Geraldine replied to my story that I put up saying that I'm looking to organize a swap shop and said she'd love to get involved. And we met up for a faithful pint in Grogan's, and that was the day that the Useless Project was founded. So Geraldine and I actually didn't know each other when we first started this. Within 10 minutes of meeting each other, we found this. It's been our full-time jobs for 3 years now. So basically what we started off with doing was doing charity shop crawls. So basically we'd bring groups of people on like crawls throughout Dublin, kind of like a non-traditional pub crawl, of different areas of Dublin. So we do one in Phibsborough or Capel Street or whatever, wherever it may be. That kind of gained a little bit of traction, and we started our social media account, which was then called Sustainable Fashion Dublin. And we really encouraged people to kind of get involved in the secondhand clothing market in terms of like, much like both Aisling and Carrie were saying, like giving a value to your clothing and, you know, thinking about the stories that can be told from your clothing and the value in swapping and secondhand and repairing and that kind of a thing. So on social media we started we started asking people to share their most loved secondhand item and tell the story that's associated with that item. Then it kind of again grew and grew and grew, and the social media kind of expanded, and we started putting up more like facts and deep dives. And, you know, as our audience were learning about the negative effects of the fast fashion industry, so were we. And kind of within about a year or so, it really snowballed, and like we got to like 25,000 followers pretty quickly. And the reason being, I think, is because, and again, both women have previously touched on this, but, you know, people in general, like people kind of know that there's an issue right now and they want to do better, but a lot of the time they just don't know how. And what we intend to be with the Useless Project is, you know, the bridge for the people who want to do better but don't necessarily know how. And we started running events to try to encourage people to engage in that circular economy, upcycling workshops, swap shops, all that kind of fun stuff. And then when COVID came along, we moved online. And as you mentioned, Ruth, we started doing workshops and webinars for schools and businesses. And again, it really kind of honed in on the idea that people are inherently good and they want to do better, but they don't really know where to start. And I feel like more now than ever, we're feeling that with the recent IPCC report and just kind of the climate doom that we're feeling at the moment, that a lot of people want to do better, but they just haven't a clue where to start. So in these webinars to schools and businesses, we talk about, you know, various aspects of climate action, be it swapping secondhand, be it having a meat-free Monday, and then also like systemic change, getting in contact with your government, lobbying groups, all that kind of stuff. And we run a virtual flea market every single month, and now we are running our flea market is back, our first ever IRL event.
Brilliant.
So excited.
Brilliant. And
Saturday, yeah.
In terms of your followers or the people in your engaged community, because I think like Aisling's new app, you know, while you're creating a space for maybe engagement and education and so on, it's actually a community that you've both managed to create as well, to a large extent. And do you have a particular age profile? Do you find that the people who follow you are, you know, at the beginning of their sustainability journey, or that they're actually very knowledgeable and, you know, people read with what's happening in, you know, research and news and stuff? I
think, right, that we have a very wide range of people, which is really kind of the lovely thing about the community. And we really do call the Useless Project a community because, you know, in the face again of this climate crisis, I think what we've lost is a sense of connection. We've lost connection to our food. We've lost connection to the hands that are making our clothing. We've lost connection to where our clothing is ending up, and it's all very individualistic at the moment. So when we come together and feel like we are part of something, it really builds something and spurs on actual change. And with the Useless Project, we really do try to, you know, engage that community, young, old, male, female, every kind of person. And we really do get that range of people coming to our events, which is great. Like we do, you know, sewing classes where we'll have somebody who's a bit more elderly teaching, you know, a 20-year-old how to sew back on a button and vice versa. So it's really nice in that way. Brilliant.
One thing that occurred to me when I was thinking about your flea markets or shopping secondhand and so on, is that a lot of sizes in secondhand shops or in charity shops seem to be quite limited. And I'm wondering if you have any tips for people who maybe struggle to find the right sizes that they need. I mean, you know, if charity shops and vintage stores are size exclusive, then where do we go when we want to shop secondhand or pre-loved?
Yeah, like that's such a good point, Ruth. And I think it's something that always needs to be brought into the conversation when we are talking about the circular economy or the secondhand clothing market, is that, it's not always accessible to people. I'm a skinny woman who can go into a charity shop and be guaranteed to find something for myself. That doesn't go for anybody. Historically, human beings were smaller. Vintage clothing is smaller. You go into a vintage shop and you'll see a glove that looks like it's made for a baby born. It's like that is something that needs to be brought into the conversation when it comes to sizing and just accessibility to going into charity shops, to the secondhand market. I think that with regards to that accessibility and trying to find a space where you can engage in sustainable fashion if you are not of quote unquote standard sizing, is by it is by swapping clothes on new, or looking at the likes of Depop where you can specify the size, because it is not nice to go, I'm not saying this, but from what I've heard from a lot of people, I can imagine it's not nice to go into a shop looking through rails, wanting to engage in this circular economy, the secondhand market, and not find anything that fits you, and which is very discouraging. So I think the likes of the swapping platforms and buying secondhand online, where you can actually specify your sizing, is really helpful. And then with that in mind as well, becoming friends with a tailor, those amazing skills are professions like tailors and cobblers, they're kind of being lost at the moment, and they're so imperative in our fight against climate change insofar as reuse. So becoming friends with your tailor, finding somebody that you can trust to bring an item of clothing that's too small, too big, they can add panels, they can take it in to make it fit you once again like a glove.
Yeah, brilliant, because I think a lot of people think, if they bring it to a repair outfit, that it's a case of taking an item in, but as you suggest, by adding panels and so on, you can actually make it bigger as well if necessary. Yeah. And Aisling, if I could bring you in there, does New have a wide variety of sizes for people who want to opt for pre-loved clothing?
Yeah, so we did quite a long series of focus groups with Asha Barber on this, who's kind of a sustainable fashion activist, and we found that so many people, especially when you're size 16 plus, found that the default is to assume you're not going to be included in these options, because the fashion industry has by default made that the experience of so many different people. So for us, I think we underestimated how much work you need to put into building that kind of inclusivity. It's not enough, which most kind of brands think it is, it's not enough to just say that something is inclusive, or just say that you can also be a part of it, but you kind of need to start contributing, and you need to do all these things. Like when you join the platform, you want to be able to find pieces that you like. So we actually worked with the Dublin Simon community and sourced a lot of size 16 plus clothing. They had a lot of high street pieces that were coming in. That was amazing. We bought them straight from them. So we were able to kind of make sure that when we started running events, and we did a 16 plus only swap shop as well, to kind of shout out that this is specifically for you, and you are valued in our community and valued as part of changing our behaviors, and we want to make sure that you're having the same experience as everyone else. And so those kind of steps for us were really important, that we often just make sure that when the sizes are available, we need to check and make sure that there's actually pieces within those sizes and that people are having a good experience. And I mean, it's definitely not perfect yet, but it's something that you need to kind of continuously work on. And I don't think there's especially brands that have the resources to do so, it's not good enough that they don't. But it is something that it's unfair to put the pressure on the people who are looking for those solutions to also, looking for those solutions to also be part of solving them, when it's not the same for people who are, maybe like size 8 or size 10, because that by default is just available for them. So yeah, that's been a kind of whole body of work for us.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like people who use the New platform, or maybe, shop secondhand or vintage, that, I feel like it takes confidence to be able to do that, to sort of own your own style in a way. I think it's much easier, Taz, maybe if I could bring you in there, it's much easier to perhaps go into a high street store and shop a look straight off a mannequin, So do you have any advice for people who maybe, want to wear secondhand clothing, but maybe don't feel that they have the confidence to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that with fast fashion, it is like one of the biggest appeals is convenience. You know, you can go into a shop, you can look at a mannequin, you can buy that outfit, and you can be on trend. Like that is like the convenience of that is unbelievable, especially for somebody who doesn't have confidence in their appearance or confidence in their style. So again, like I empathize with it, and that is a barrier to entry in this secondhand clothing market. What I would recommend is using apps like Instagram to find people who are your size, your style, how you would like to look, and try to replicate those that clothing. Again, with apps like New and Depop, it's amazing because you can directly specify what you want, and finding those people online that look like you is really, really helpful. Because again, if you're looking at a mannequin and that's not in your sizing, again, that's it isn't always accessible even in that way. So finding somebody online that looks like you and trying to replicate that style secondhand is great.
Yeah, brilliant tip. Carrie Ann, I have a couple of questions coming in, which I think you might be in a good position to answer for us. And I'm just conscious of the fact that some people might need to leave us by 2 o'clock today.
No problem.
So here's a question from Monica, Lady of the Valley. I'm a small business owner making clothes and textiles in West Cork. Where can I find out more information about how to make my business as sustainable as possible, while still being able to make my living from it? Good question, Monica. I'm sure there's quite a few other people on the call today who are wondering.
Absolutely. Well, firstly, I feel your pain, Monica. I'm sure you're finding the struggles that other small businesses and designers are feeling coming into this sector. If you use, I suppose, the life cycle that I showed initially and kind of use that as your initial mapping of your garments and try and address each one of those kind of areas with better kind of practice. But I know you're actually looking for the sourcing. And this is a reason why I actually set up my consultancy, is to help brands, retailers and designers really navigate this kind of area. I've taken my 15 years experience to really try and, transition change within this space. So fantastic resources. If you want to message me afterwards, but you have the oh, my mind's at the gone blank now.
Sorry, I put you on the spot there, Carrie Ann.
But yeah, the Supply Compass are a great organization in the UK that will help you navigate your whole operation and supply chain and sourcing. They come at a monthly fee, but if you are quite serious about that, you can certainly align with them. And also the Centre for Sustainable Fashion, they house thousands of materials, and materials alone, I've recently worked with a brand on sourcing materials that come accredited. So they're a really fantastic source, and you can also get low MOQs as well and certifications with their products there.
Thanks, Carrie Ann. There's another question here from Fanula, and maybe Aisling or Carrie Ann again, you might have some answers to this. Do we know who the biggest consumers of fast fashion are? Is there an age range? When I think of fast fashion, I think of young brands and perhaps young consumers, Fanula, I think. But is this actually accurate? So I don't know if either of you have come across any facts on that.
Yeah, it is quite accurate. So what I guess is funny about Gen Z, which are the below 24-year-olds, is that they are most vocal in terms of kind of activism and understanding the climate crisis and different things that are happening, but they are kind of, I guess, exponentially growing the fashion industry. So their rate of consumption is really high. What's interesting for them is that they baseline their consumption habits on generations before. So actually they've really missed a beat. They've never not known fast fashion in the way that some other generations have. And so their understanding of their own reduction of consumption is very different to what, someone who's maybe in their 40s or 50s might understand of what a reduction in your consumption would be. So yes, definitely being fueled by a younger generation. We've actually found, oh, sorry, that's actually a bit on the next question. I can jump into that after. But yeah, I would say that it is across the board. People are consuming fast fashion and they're consuming it a lot. But the need to constantly buy is definitely younger because it's just more social events.
And it's just habitual, as you say, that's what people have grown up with. Taz, in terms of, because I know you're saying you have a mixed community age range, but I feel like you do have a lot of young followers as well. Do you find that if people are buying new, that they're opting for sustainable brands or Irish brands, local design and locally made products, if they are buying new?
I think that the demographic of our followers, insofar as the people who are maybe supporting Irish design and buying sustainable brands that are typically more expensive, would probably be, 30, 40, 50-year-olds, to be honest. I think young people, they don't have as much disposable income for the most part, and that's what the huge appeal of fast fashion is. And unfortunately, much like Aisling was saying there, that like the value in clothing is very, very different to them. If they see a bag for €100 that's handmade by an Irish designer that took a week, it's almost hard sometimes for Gen Z, and this is such a generalization, but to identify with the value in that comparing to buying a bag that probably looks identical, that's a £5 online.
Yeah. So I mean, your ethos kind of with the Useless Project is to encourage people to actually use less, isn't it? To consume less. And in that regard, looking after your clothing is something that I think maybe we don't think about very much in light of the kind of fast fashion habits we've all developed. But one of the things you try to encourage people to do is to look after your existing clothing better, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like a lot of the conversation, surrounding sustainable fashion is still consumption. It's still consuming more fashion, even if it is secondhand, even if it's sustainable. Whereas, at the center of it is the antithesis of that, which is using what we already have, sewing back on a button, mending a tear, getting your shoes resoled. That is all far more sustainable than buying secondhand. That is at the crux of it. The most sustainable option is looking after the clothing that we already own. And that is the simple measures of darning a sock, although it may seem ridiculous. It's putting the value back into that item of clothing, and whether it is upcycling or again bring it to a tailor if an item of clothing is too big or too small, looking at our wardrobe and actually using what we have and consuming less is really as simple as it is.
And Aisling, do you think, because I think something you said to me the other day ties in with what Taz just mentioned there, that idea of maybe keeping an item for longer and developing more of an attachment to your existing clothing or to your friends' clothing or clothing that you get on new, for example. Do you think we almost need to reframe our attitude to clothing in a way? I feel like, I know I'm a child of the 80s, so I'm going to tell you all my age now, but I think when we were younger, I feel like we had less, but we looked after stuff more, And I feel there was like a 20-year period in fashion where that kind of attitude was forgotten a little bit. Do you think that we need to move back to that point a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the best way I've heard this described really changed how I looked at clothes forever. And it was that everything that comes from the earth should be thought of as having a life cycle. And for humans, it's that you hope that you're made with love, that you can grow up, fulfill all of the things that you want to do, kind of really see out your purpose, eventually die and go back into the ground. And why is it that we really look at anything else that is produced from our natural resources in a way that's any different? And so if we look at objects or look at clothes, we hope that they're made with love, well-intentioned, not having any destruction on the environment or on people, that they can really fulfill their entire life cycle eventually and have many different lives and many different experiences, and then eventually go back into the ground. And so if we kind of take that to heart and understand that as consumers, if we are looking at buying a piece, especially if we're looking at buying it firsthand, we need to think to ourselves, am I the right person to give this piece the life that it deserves? And if you're not, you potentially should not buy that piece. Or if you can't do it individually, we have to do it collectively. But we have a responsibility now, because that piece of clothing has depleted our natural resources, which are depleting way too fast. And then also having that emotional attachment to your pieces of clothing, it makes your entire experience different. If you don't have any attachment to the clothes that you put on yourself, what that does to you as a person is actually quite difficult. The fashion industry constantly tells us that we're not good enough and we need more stuff in order to feel better. And the kind of cycle continues. So having that kind of love for those pieces that you put on your body, and knowing that it's, you know, it's speaking for you and it's a representation of what you care about, having that understanding can really change how you view clothes and help you to become more conscious just with that mindset shift.
Yeah, another question's just coming in there from Pauline Gallagher. Is anybody running mending workshops in Dublin? So Taz, I know that you're probably going to get back to doing in real life events.
Yes.
Have you any plans to run mending workshops?
Yeah, like definitely that's our intention. Can't wait to get back with those workshops. But also, like, YouTube is amazing. YouTube is fantastic for learning the basics and sewing back on a button, you know, darning socks or replacing a zip. Really, they're really amazing and really useful. So do look up different YouTube accounts.
Brilliant. Carrie,
just on that note, sorry, Reuse Month is starting in October, and usually across Reuse Month nationally, just loads of repair workshops. And I believe CRNI manage that event and works with local authorities. So I definitely recommend keeping an eye out for the program of that, because there is loads of free workshops happening across that month.
Brilliant. Thanks, Carrie. And I was just going to ask you there, in terms of your experience working with charity shops and charities that sell clothing, you know, are there any learnings that you've got from that work that you could maybe offer to the audience in terms of their own consumer patterns? So I know there's an issue with, for example, you know, very cheap clothing not being able to be sold on.
No, absolutely. Unfortunately, what we see in charity retail is shops being flooded with poor quality garments. And the ICSA reported, that's the Irish Charity Shop Association of Ireland, reported a couple of years ago their charity shops under their membership was processing 23,000 tonnes, of which only 12,000 tonnes were actually resold throughout their charity retail. So we're seeing massive quantity and very small quality coming through charity retail, and that is because fast fashion is really feeding that model, unfortunately, because we have this disposable mindset. And this is with no disrespect to the garment workers behind that, is generally it's not their skill set at all. It's down to poor quality materials and stuff that they're designed to basically fall apart as such, and not have a long lifespan as such. So when it comes to charity retail, you know, get to know your local charity shops, ask them what they're looking for. Some charity retailers will accept damaged products that they can send for recycling, some don't. So, you know, if that's the way, be conscious of donating to charity retail, and that if you have items that are resaleable products, fantastic, label them in a bag. And if they're not resaleable product, ask them in advance. But if you do take that, and label them as well, and just help them, because they're going through, when I like the quantities of products going through, and remember, hands are sorting those products as well. If you can like lighten the load there when you're donating, it would be very gratefully received.
Okay, brilliant. Very interesting. I think a lot of people aren't really aware of the workload in, you know, many of us just kind of throw stuff into the charity bag, and it's almost like passing the buck. We don't really think about, you know, whether the garment is wearable or not.
Absolutely.
Just to interrupt there with a comment from Monica, for those who would like to search for style inspirational tutorials, I find TikTok fabulous for any age, size and skill. Thanks, Monica. That sounds brilliant. In terms of that idea of caring for your clothes, Taz, I really enjoyed reading your tips in terms of washing and tumble drying and so on, dry cleaning of clothing. I know, you know, I'm guilty myself of throwing a whole load of socks into the tumble dryer sometimes, but now I realize that's like really, really bad in terms of energy consumption and, you know, climate change. So are there any takeaways for our audience in terms of looking after your clothes in a more sustainable way?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, the goal is that we want to keep our clothing in circulation for as long as possible. And how we do that is by caring for them. That's the sewing on a button, but that's also in the washing them, because you have the power to really like break down the item of clothing every single time you wash it if you're not washing it correctly. And like looking at the clothing care instructions of an item of clothing is really important. It's like, if only all of our clothing came with an instruction of exactly how to wash it. Well, it does. And if we're not following those guidelines, then we could be breaking it down. So one thing that we always like to specify, you know, and I know we've got loads of seamstresses and designers here who are probably like, yeah, I know this is old news, but anyway, in the basin on the label with the number in it, a lot of people think that that's the recommended temperature at which we should be washing that item of clothing, but in actual fact, it's the highest possible temperature that item of clothing can withstand before it starts to break down. So if you have a gorgeous jumpsuit that you're washing in a 40-degree wash and you paid a fortune for it and it's all amazing and it says 30 on it, then like you're kind of breaking down the fibers of that material every single time you're washing it. So looking at the clothing care instructions and making sure you're caring for your clothing in that way and washing them as little as possible.
I feel like, you know, it's true what they say that you do learn something every day, because I literally didn't know that. I thought that was the recommended temperature. So if there's one thing a new thing I'm going to go away with today, it's that piece of information. We're going to come to a close very soon. So if any of our audience members would like to drop a few more questions into the chat, we'd be more than happy to answer those for you, or any comments.
There's actually a really good question there about microplastics. I'd love to jump in on there.
Brilliant.
What about microplastics? What can we do to reduce these in terms of buying and caring for our clothes? There are some really great products. So firstly, to just kind of explain microplastics in clothing, 70% of our clothing is synthetic, it's man-made, it's basically derived from plastic. When that goes into any sort of heat, washing, friction, it breaks away. There's a thermal interaction and it degrades, and microplastics happen. They come through our washing machines, and our washing machine filters are not capable of capturing them, and then they enter into our waste streams and stuff like that, and into our waters and stuff. So to capture that, there's really good products. Again, checking your clothing will determine what your clothes are made of. The guppy bag, which I use, and there's also Decora ball. The guppy bag I know you can get from Patagonia, and I know the Rediscovery Centre's Eco Store have that as well. Reusey here in Ireland also showed Decora ball, which is nearly always sold out, but it's really user friendly as well. And also there is now filters coming in on the market that you can actually put another kind of filter over your filter in your machine that actually captures them as well.
Oh, wow. Very good. Thank you for that. Let's have a look at the questions. Does the panel believe that there is an opportunity for hand sewn rather than machine sewn garments?
We've gone back to the world of couture. Absolutely, everything by hand. Yeah, look, you know, you can get those sewing machines that are manually driven and stuff like that, but you'd have to go back into the world of couture, absolutely, for it to go into hand sewn, and a lot of time and a lot of patience. Yeah,
I mean, I feel in answer to that question that maybe, you know, there are Irish designers who are employing some certainly hand sewn finishes and so on. Again, it's a question of cost. I don't know how viable that would be on a large scale in terms of mass consumption, though. Aisling, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Carrie on it. I think specifically it would be for couture houses. I think what the fashion industry has done was it's just totally devalued how long it takes to make a garment. And so in order to actually do that, they have to be done by machines the majority of the time. And I think that there is definitely a market for it, but it's luxury fashion, and it needs to be people who can buy really high price points, because you can't actually undervalue your work, or else you could end up creating your own sweatshop for yourself. And then that would
I mean, I think that is something that happened over the last 20 years or so, is that, you know, we became so used to buying clothing that was very, very cheap, and in a way it's almost devalued the skills inherent in the production of those garments.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird economical thing as well, in that we started producing things that we could consume for far less. And so we didn't have the same kind of inflation that you'd need of people's salaries and things like that as well, which obviously is a wider issue, and we're in a complete mess now. But we haven't actually looked at the value of the things that we're producing and what we should be paying for them. And that, I think, at some point will probably come to a head when we realize that we actually need to be paying a lot more for pretty much everything that we buy.
And in terms of it being Climate Action Week and our talk coming to a close now this afternoon, I'm wondering if I could ask each of our panelists for one quick climate action takeaway that our audience can go away with today.
Yeah, I'll kick off. Yeah, so not my words, but I always end with this by Vivienne Westwood, is to buy less, choose well, and make it last. And, you know, adopt that to most things in your life. You know, you can really, really bring big changes with that.
Ashley?
I always find the wardrobe audit really helpful. And basically, you put all the clothes that you have on a hanger, flip all the hangers the same way around, and each time you wear an item, flip the hanger the opposite way. At the end of the month, have a look at your wardrobe and understand what you actually love and what you actually wear, and understand why you bought all of those other things that you don't wear. And then that can help you to become more conscious in the future.
I feel like there's major decluttering going to go on after that too. And Taz?
I think it's like to not undervalue your own individual impact and the impact that your individual action can have. I think that more now than ever, a lot of people are giving into climate doom and saying, look, there is nothing that I can do. Like, there's what's the point in even trying? But like, the reality of the situation is, if you sew back a button onto a shirt and are at this talk right now, you are more likely to talk to somebody about buying secondhand. You are going to be more likely to talk to your TD about climate action. You are going to be more likely to sign that petition. Like, it is a knock-on effect. So although these tiny, tiny changes may seem so insignificant, they really all do join together and make a big impactful difference. So don't underestimate what you can do, I suppose.
Brilliant. And on that optimistic note, I'd like to let you all know that there are still events running right up until Sunday for Dublin Climate Action Week. I'd like to thank all our panelists today. I'd like to thank you, the audience, for joining us, as well as Sinead from Fingal County Council and Fionnuala from South Dublin County Council. Hope you all have a great afternoon, and thanks for joining us.